Bethany Ann Decker was born in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She was bright and hardworking, studying global and economic change at George Mason University, as well as working a full-time job. Whilst at university, she started a relationship with Army National Guardsman Emil Decker. She became pregnant and the pair married in 2009, welcoming a baby boy soon after. Due to his job in the military, he was often deployed to Afghanistan. And when her husband was away, Bethany was able to balance her responsibilities with the help of her in-laws, who would watch her son while she worked and went to school. The marital bliss was not to last, however, as while working as a waitress, she met an immigrant from Bolivia called Ronald Roldan. And before long, the two were pursuing an affair. Bethany and Emil's marital woes began to show. She moved out into an apartment on Orchard Grass Terrace in Ashburn, Virginia. Ronald moved in soon after and the relationship proved toxic. Ronald was extremely controlling. He would contact her throughout the day, demanding she send pictures of where she was and who she was with. Bethany was trapped and her family started thinking of ways to get her out. But by the end of the year, Bethany had fallen pregnant again. As she'd maintained a romantic relationship with Emil while he was on leave, the father of her child remains unclear. After returning from deployment in January of 2011, Emil and Bethany went on holiday to Hawaii. After coming back, they stayed with Emil's parents, who were unaware of the strains on their marriage. The next morning, January 29th, Emil saw Bethany before she went back to the apartment she shared with Ronald. She called him to work to confirm what shift she would be working the following week, and Ronald says he saw her that afternoon. Emil was redeployed on the 2nd of February and Bethany did not come to the airport to say goodbye, and her absence was put down to their relationship problems. This was not rare. People could often go a few days without hearing from Bethany, as her life was a busy balancing act of parenting, school, and work. She remained active on Facebook and was still sending messages to friends, however it was these messages that would arouse suspicion. A few of Bethany's friends contacted her mother Kim Nelson to explain that they had received messages from Bethany's accounts, but they did not believe she was the one writing and sending them. On February 19th, Kim asked her parents to visit Bethany and Ronald's apartment to see if she was okay. They noticed that her car was still in the parking lot, but it looked abandoned, dusty, with a flat tire and parked at an awkward angle. After banging on the front door and not getting a response, panic began to set in. They raised the alarm and reported her missing. Initial inquiry is gravely concerned investigators. Her bank accounts had not been touched. Her phone records showed that it had not been used since her last known whereabouts of January 29th. She had failed to turn up at work and had not been seen at her university. It quickly became apparent that there was a love triangle, so Emil and Ronald became focuses of the investigation. After contacting Emil, he returned home to speak to the police. Ronald explained to investigators that he thought she had simply returned to live with her parents. Police looked into Ronald's background further and discovered he had a string of previous convictions, including identity theft and destruction of property after smashing a woman's car window. He was not able to give consistent answers when questioned about when he had seen Bethany's car parked outside. As Ronald had moved out, they obtained a warrant to search his new address. They seized phones and a laptop, but no new evidence would come of this. During this time, Emil was granted a divorce from the missing Bethany. Ronald has only ever made one public statement on the disappearance of Bethany Decker, which he made through his attorney. "My client remains hopeful and prays daily that Bethany will come home. He has complete confidence they are working hard on the case." In the years after her disappearance, Ronald began a relationship with a woman named Vicki Willoughby. Like his relationship with Bethany Decker, it quickly became abusive and controlling. During a fight, Vicki pulled a gun on Ronald. He wrestled the weapon away from her and shot her 3 times. Vicki would miraculously survive, but would lose an eye and live with the emotional scars forever. No charges were filed against her as it was deemed that she had acted in self-defense. He pleaded guilty to 2 felony assault charges and was sentenced to 6 to 8 years in prison. She would talk about her experiences on an episode of the hit TV show Dr. Phil, and she said in an interview with the Daily Mail, "Another girl is going to get hurt by this man. It's a terrible injustice, not just for me, but for the next girl he attacks." Once Ronald has served his sentence, proceedings will begin to deport him from the United States. There is no evidence that Bethany ever gave birth to the baby she was carrying at the time of her disappearance, and no trace of her has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Bethany Decker, please contact the relevant authorities. Number 4. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Marcia Brantley have captured the attention of the press and public for years. Marcia Brantley was born Marcia Ellen Rader on the 28th of February, 1959. Originally from Illinois, she was an only child with a large extended family scattered all over the United States. Marcia was private and kept a small circle of friends. She was friendly and strong-willed with a take-charge, no-nonsense attitude. She loved animals and would foster dogs in need of homes. Her biggest passion, however, was writing. She formed a writing club, dreamed of publishing her own works, and kept a blog that detailed the ins and outs of her life. On the 31st of March, 2000, Marcia married Donnie Brantley. In her own words, it was a day filled with joy. I was bustling around and getting ready for a wedding. Mina. Family arrived at intervals throughout the day, meals were shared, and then there was the big event itself. It was great. The happiest day of my life. These words are taken from a blog post that she wrote for their wedding anniversary in 2009. In the same year as her wedding, tragedy would strike as she would lose both her parents within weeks of each other to cancer. In the years that followed, she was active on her blog called Magpie's Nest, doing everything from film reviews to lamenting about the harsh Tennessee weather. Her blog gave an insight into her daily life with Donnie, as did her Facebook page. My wonderful husband brought me roses home at lunch, just because. In the comments she wrote, he just does stuff like that, he's a keeper. But sometimes what we see online is not always a true representation of reality. According to her friend Nancy Grill, who was in the writing club with Marcia, it was obvious that their relationship had underlying problems. According to Nancy, Donnie could be antisocial and didn't appear interested in the same things as Marcia. On the 2nd of June, 2009, Marcia posted to Facebook, saying, "Are all the planets out of alignment? Why is everything that can go wrong going wrong for the past month?" One person commented, "Except for the roses your hubby gave you, just because." Marcia never replied. After this, no more Facebook posts were made. No blogs were published. Nobody heard from her. However, it wasn't until July or August that her absence began to show. She was often seen out walking her foster dogs, and neighbors noted they hadn't seen her do this for a while. Growing ever more concerned, a neighbor, Phyllis Dodd, went and knocked on the Brantleys' front door. When Donnie answered, she asked where Marcia had gone, saying that she hadn't been seen recently. Donnie said that she'd left him, and they were getting a divorce. Phyllis told her hairdresser, Kelly DeLude, who informed a local attorney, Jerry Hoffa, in October. He passed the information on to District Attorney General Steve Beebe, and before long, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations was involved. By this time, it was November. Investigators had little to go on. Marcia was by all accounts a private person, and nearly 5 months had passed since she'd last been seen. Donnie maintained when talking to investigators that she had left her own accord and was intending on divorcing him. But alarm bells were beginning to ring for investigators, and they became increasingly concerned for Marcia's welfare. An initial search did nothing to quell their fears. Her car remained parked at the house, her clothes were in her wardrobe. All her possessions were where she had left them. Police could find no evidence of a woman intending to leave her spouse. Friends were also adamant that she would not have left her foster dogs behind. Investigators did not believe that she'd left by choice. They found receipts showing that Donnie had purchased items that they theorized could be used to dispose of a body, including a plastic drop cloth, a welder's kit, a tarp, and a pressure washer. During their search, an unusual email came to light. Marcia had written to the members of her writing club, saying she would be, quote, missing for some time without explanation. "I'm sure we'll cross paths often, since we live in such a small town." One of her closest friends, Reggie J., said, "It was a big shock, because when she formed this group, her one criteria was that, if you want to be in the group, you can't quit without a good reason." Because she wanted everyone to be committed. However, according to another friend, she had been planning on leaving the group. The friend hadn't told anyone, as Marcia had said it's in confidence. Authorities could not trace the origin of the email, and some questioned if it had even been sent by Marcia. Marcia also allegedly took around $110,000 that she had hidden in her home. She apparently left a note on her car saying, "Sell it, see what you can get for it." The note was not preserved as evidence by the police, and they did not believe there was any money hidden inside the home. In 2012, the home of Marcia and Donnie Brantley was searched again, this time with the assistance of cadaver dogs. Police believe that foul play had played a role in her disappearance, but no new evidence or clues turned up. 2013 brought a new twist to the case. Despite having no body and no trace of Marcia, law enforcement announced that they were indicting Donnie Brantley on charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution outlined two motives: infidelity and financial troubles. Donnie ran a home repair company, and after the housing market crashed of 2009, he had little in the way of business. After Marcia vanished, Donnie had her power of attorney and could have signed her name to sell his assets. However, 10th Judicial District Attorney General Steve Crump said that they could find no evidence of him using her power of attorney for financial gain. While Crump said Donnie hadn't used her power of attorney, 1 month after her last known whereabouts, her signature was used to sell the home repair business. One handwriting expert said that she had signed in her own name, but the police disagreed. They requested it be sent to a second expert for examination. This second expert determined that Marcia did not write that signature. A key piece of evidence surrounded Marcia's phone. Cell phone analysis showed that incoming calls stopped on June 2, 2009. Donnie said he had recently bought her a new phone, and she had taken that one with her when she left. However, it would later emerge that Donnie had used that phone to contact a dating line, despite saying it was in Marcia's possession. They said he was, quote, looking for something different in his marriage, evidenced by the fact that he had also used online dating for several months. However, Donnie's attorney said he did not do this until after his wife had left. The prosecution also referred to a kiss he had shared with an ex-girlfriend before the disappearance of his wife, but the defense argued it never went any further. According to Marcia's friends, she would not have left over an affair, but would have been heartbroken and furious. They said that the emotional attachment she had to her house was strong. It had been built by her parents and was solely in her name. They argued she would have simply kicked him out, rather than gone. Within about a week of Marcia's disappearance, both the prosecution and the defense stated that Donnie had allegedly hand-delivered a card to his ex-girlfriend with whom he had shared the kiss. It read, the prosecution argued that the timing and the contents of the card was proof that Donnie was the cause of his wife's disappearance, that he had killed her and was ready to move on. The defense rubbished those claims, saying there were no sinister undertones to the card. He merely meant he was ready to reconnect and form a friendship. They did continue to see each other for a short time after. And according to the defense, his ex-girlfriend never heard Donnie speak ill of Marcia. When talking about the receipts found during the search, the prosecution said these, along with a ticket for a landfill and Marcia's body not being found, was evidence of a premeditated, calculated murder, which in the state of Tennessee you must prove beyond a reasonable doubt to secure a conviction. The defense said the receipts were for items he would purchase as part of his home repair business. The inconsistency in Donnie's story was another key argument for the prosecution. They alleged that Donnie had changed his story several times, and the investigators said he had misled them about where their camper van was. The police said he had given different versions of events to neighbors, saying she was either living in the van or she had gone out west. The camper van was key for the prosecution, but there are conflicting reports as to where it was eventually found. One thing is certain is that Donnie had told investigators that the van was parked at a campground. However, when the police went and followed this lead, it wasn't there. The defense said this was not Donnie lying but a miscommunication. He said that he often kept the van in a storage facility or with his parents. The police said they had found it within his parents' farm in Georgia, and when they searched it, no trace of a crime or Marcia was found. The defense argued that investigators had used bad practice and planted seeds of bias and doubt before conducting interviews. They said that before asking neighbors for their opinion of what kind of man Donnie was, they had told them he had kept changing his story. In an interview with Bradley County Sheriff's Office, this is what Nancy Grill had to say. My initial feeling was that Marcia had deliberately left and was going to go away and be that best-selling author. But the longer she was gone and when I talked to the TBI and they told me that Donnie had told so many lies, then I began to wonder. When the police were brought in cadaver dogs in 2012, the Judicial District and the District Attorney General Steve Beebe would be hit by allegations of police misconduct and corruption. Defense lawyers said that the district had a reputation for not honoring the rights of defendants and withholding evidence. BEB issued a defense, saying he did not know about any malpractice and he would have put a stop to it. When looking for a viable reason for Marcia's disappearance, the defense said that her severe clinical depression could not be ignored. Her medical records highlighted mood swings and that she had been injecting hormones to try and lessen the effects of the depression. Whilst the defense and prosecution argued back and forth, a shocking new twist came. 1 week before he was due to stand trial, the family of Marcia Brantley requested that the charges against Donnie be dropped. They said that if the case wasn't strong enough, Marcia would never see justice and they would be out of options. As they dropped the charges without prejudice, they could later be refiled if new evidence came to light. In October of 2016, Donnie was again indicted, this time on a second-degree murder charge. The District Attorney General would not say what new evidence, or if indeed any new evidence, had come to light. All court documents that have previously been opened to the public have since been expunged, meaning there is no official court record or any evidence of any charges ever being filed against Donnie Brantley. 18 months after being indicted for a second time, it was time to select a jury. However, a new announcement came that all charges against Donnie Brantley would again be dropped. The District Attorney General said he was worried that the case would not make it as far as a jury and that it could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Since her last known whereabouts, no trace of Marcia Brantley has ever been found. Her social security number has not been used, no visas have been applied for, and there is no evidence that she left the United States. Her whereabouts remain unknown. Skidmore, Missouri is the setting of this tragic and disturbing story. In the interest of providing a bit of background, it's worth noting that this small town with a population of less than 400 people already had a big name when it came to crime. It became the center of a media firestorm in the early 1980s. A local man named Ken McElroy had a notorious reputation as a vicious bully, accused of he would often receive light sentences for his crimes, which angered the people of Skidmore. When leaving a local bar in 1981, he was shot dead in broad daylight in a vigilante-style execution. Despite his wife witnessing the murder, the town closed ranks and would not corroborate her version of events. And 20 years later, this refusal to talk and a stalled investigation would thrust Skidmore back into the spotlight once again. Branson Kane Perry was born on February 24, 1981. His parents divorced in late 2000, but he remained the apple of their eye, and they adored him. He graduated from Nottoway Holt High School, and soon after, began working odd jobs around the neighborhood to support himself. He was an active young man, and a black belt martial artist. After the divorce of his parents, he lived with his father at 304 West Oak Street in Skidmore. April 7, 2001. Perry visited his neighbor Jason Bierman, and while he was there he ended up being inadvertently drugged. While under the influence he stripped naked and ended up having sex with Bierman. It was known that Branson was gay and had sexual encounters in the past, but he felt embarrassed and upset and he confided in his father Bob. Bob knew about his son's sexuality, but he was furious that his son had been taken advantage of. 4 days later, Bob had been in hospital and was due home soon. Branson wanted to have the house tidy for him when he returned. At the same time, 2 unnamed men were carrying out repair works on Bob's car outside. The events of that day remain unclear. The following is an excerpt taken from a blog post made by Rebecca Clino, Branson's mother. The events of that day are fairly sketchy to me and often make no sense. I don't have a timeline of when they occurred, only sporadic comments that were made. At one point, the friend saw Branson run into the kitchen and take something out of the cabinets, then run out the back door. When he returned, she said he wouldn't tell her what he was doing and acted like nothing had happened. Later, she said she had taken a shower and when she came out of the bathroom, she saw one of the men that was working on the car going through the cabinets in the kitchen. She said she had asked him what he was looking for. He told her nothing and went back outside. Then at approximately 3 p.m., she had been upstairs when she heard the front porch door shut. She looked out the window and saw Branson. She asked him where he was going and he told her he was going to put the jumper cables into the storage shed and would be right back. She never saw him again. The men that had been working on the car claimed to have never seen him. No one saw him. When Branson didn't return from outside, Gina says that she believed he had simply gotten sidetracked, so she left his house and went home. The next day, April 12th, Branson's grandmother, Joanne, stopped by the Perry residence. When she got to the house, she realized no one was home and that the door was unlocked. Over the next few days, she continued to call the house but would get no answer. She contacted Branson's mother and they realized that neither had spoken to him. Bob was discharged from hospital a few days later than expected, and he and his wife went to report Branson as a missing person on April 17th. County police organized a 15-mile radius search of the area surrounding Branson and Bob's home. They could find no trace of him in the fields or abandoned buildings. Police also couldn't locate the jumper cables he said he was taking to the shed. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that they were found just inside the door. For the following 6 weeks, the police interviewed at least 100 people in Skidmore in an attempt to piece together Branson's movements and generate any new leads. They spoke to his friend Gina, who was one of the last people to see Branson. She told the police that Branson had been experimenting with drugs, namely marijuana and amphetamines. This was confirmed by a member of his family who said that he had a bottle of Valium with him on the day he disappeared. Following this lead, police began investigating other drug users who were known to Branson, but they all passed polygraph tests when they said they had not seen him. Rumors circulated that Branson was indebted to local drug dealers, but no information surrounding this came to light. Bob's first thought was that he was embarrassed by his encounter with Bierman, and as a result had gone to Kansas City to see friends. He also assumed he could have hitchhiked as he didn't have a working car. The investigation into what happened to Branson stalled and nothing new would arise until 2003. On April 10th of that year, a 59-year-old pastor and scout leader called Jack Wayne Rogers was arrested. Allegations ranged from child pornography and assault to practicing medicine without a license after he removed the genitalia of a trans woman in a hotel room, in a botched gender reassignment operation. After being unable to stop her from bleeding, his victim called 911. While investigating him, they uncovered numerous posts he had made on message boards pertaining to the torture and assault of various men. One of these posts stood out to investigators. In it, he claimed to have been flagged down by a blonde male hitchhiking. He described raping, torturing, and mutilating the young man. He also claimed that the victim had been buried in a secluded area of the Ozarks. Police believed that there was a possible connection to Branson. However, Rogers denied seeing him, let alone knowing him. He said all the posts he had made were part of a fantasy and completely made up. The law enforcement were not convinced. They continued searching Rogers' house and in his car found a turtle claw necklace, which bore a resemblance to one that Branson had owned. In April 2004, Rogers stood trial and was convicted of assault and performing an illegal surgery, for which he received a sentence of 17 years and 7 years respectively. He also received a 30-year sentence for charges relating to child pornography, which would run concurrently. Whilst he was being sentenced, Branson's mother Rebecca begged and pleaded with him for information on her son's whereabouts. He maintained that he did not know Branson and was not involved in his disappearance. Rebecca said she no longer believed Rogers was involved. She said in a statement, "The police are not completely ruling him out, but now the investigation has turned towards Skidmore again. They have received new leads there. I suppose time has a way of unraveling secrets. I believe someone in that area knows what happened to Branson. In my heart, I don't believe this suspect is responsible. Despite the nightmare I lived through at his sentencing, I am thankful that someone with that much evil will never walk the streets again." Sadly, just 3 years after the disappearance of his son, Bob passed away in 2004. The police and Branson's surviving family refused to give up. 8 years after he vanished, the police received what they referred to as a credible tip that Branson's remains could be in Quitman, Missouri. However, this lead, like all others, would go nowhere. To add to the tragedy, after a long fight with cancer, Rebecca Clino, Branson's mother, passed away in 2011. The Q Center for Missing Persons founder Monica Clayson, who was a personal friend of Rebecca, vowed to carry on the search for Branson and not give up hope. Rebecca was buried alongside an empty plot for Branson, which listed his date of death as April 11, 2001, the day he was last seen alive. Branson's case remains open, and the police and family still hope that one day the questions surrounding Branson's disappearance will be answered. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Branson Perry, please contact the relevant authorities. Number 2. CCTV often plays a vital role in investigating crimes. It can help piece together events and be a vital witness when there may be no others. In the age of CCTV, it remains a mystery how some people can seemingly vanish without a trace. With cameras picking up at every move, what happens when a CCTV trail goes cold and an investigation hits a brick wall? This is the story of the disappearance of Trevor Deely. On the 15th of August, 1978, Anne and Michael Deely welcomed their fifth child, a little boy named Trevor. He grew up in County Kildare and soon became an extremely intelligent and career-driven young man. He developed an aptitude for business and technology and by his early 20s had landed a job in the IT department of the Bank of Ireland asset management team. The work Christmas party was scheduled for the December 7, 2000. Drinking began at Copperface Jack's and the Hilton before it carried on to Buckwally's nightclub on Lower Leeson Street. 22-year-old Trevor left Buckwally's around 3:30 a.m. He walked in the direction of the Renoir complex where he had an apartment on Serpentine Avenue. Around 10 minutes after leaving Buckwally's, Trevor arrived at his office and security let him in. He made a cup of tea and spoke to his colleague, Carl, who was on the night shift. Trevor checked his emails and made a schedule of what needed to be done the following day. Due to a heavy storm and a taxi strike, he left at 4:03 a.m. with his umbrella in hand and carried on foot. He rang a friend of his in County Kildare and the friend described the voicemail as, "Hi Glenn, I missed you there. Just on my way home, all going good. I'll talk to you tomorrow." The message was regarded as innocuous by his friend and it was deleted. Showed a man dressed in black that was waiting outside for around 30 minutes before Trevor appeared. When he got there, Trevor and the man engaged in brief conversation, but by the time Trevor left the bank, the man in black had gone. At 4:14 a.m., CCTV captured Trevor walking past what was the AIB Bank on the corner of Bagot Street Bridge and Haddington Road, heading towards his apartment. Around 30 seconds later, a man in black takes the same route. The Gardaí believed that this is the same man that was stood outside the bank and spoke to Trevor. This footage of him at 4:14 a.m. is the last known sighting of him. Due to the heavy partying the night before, Trevor's failure to turn up at work was not considered unusual. His flatmates were away that weekend and did not know he was missing. When Trevor failed to show up on Monday, the alarm was raised. The bank called his family and after confirming that no one had spoken with him that weekend, he was reported as a missing person. The family's take charge approach drew praise from the Gardaí. Detective Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald, who worked the case from the beginning, said, "I have never worked a case where the family has been so proactive." His friends and family handed out thousands of leaflets when knocking on doors and put posters up all over Dublin. However, due to the days that had passed from his last known sighting to him being reported missing, vital time and clues had been lost. In the weeks before his disappearance, Trevor had flown to Alaska to meet a girl that he had befriended while she was holidaying in Dublin. Two Gardaí traveled out to Alaska to talk to her, but this proved to be another dead end. The Garda Sabaqua team scoured the River Dodder and the Grand Canal, but turned up nothing. Trevor's sister Michelle said that she called his phone a few times over the weekend he went missing, and she believes that it rang out. Dr. Philip Perry, a senior research fellow in Radio and Optical Communications Laboratory at Dublin City University, said that had Trevor's phone gone into the water, it would have died within seconds. Michelle has since stated that she is not 100% sure it rang. After 16 years and still no trace, the investigation was reopened in December of 2016. In April 2017, the CCTV footage was enhanced and released to the public. The Gardaí said they believe that the man seen following Trevor was the same man from outside the bank. Forward. In August that same year, the Gardaí began searching a secluded area stretching 3 acres of a Dublin suburb around 5 miles from where Trevor had been seen on the CCTV footage. They had received a tip that Trevor had been murdered that night by a criminal from Crumlin, County Antrim, a criminal that was well known to the Gardaí. He was involved in a prostitution and drug gang who operated in the area that Trevor was last seen. The gang had also been investigated in June 1998 for the murder Kelly, a young prostitute who'd been stabbed to death on Grand Canal Bank. The informant said that Trevor had crossed paths with his murderer by chance and it was simply a case of wrong place, wrong time. By September, the search had been called off. Trevor's case remains open and is yet unsolved. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Trevor Deely, please contact the relevant authorities. Number 1. The disappearance of Marilyn Bergeron captivated Canada. Born in Quebec in 1983, she was a bright and gifted child, with a love for the arts, music, and languages. Her open and inquisitive nature meant she was fascinated by different cultures and ways of life. Her parents described friends that could be a bad influence, and she could sometimes find herself in trouble due to her recklessness. Her passion for the arts meant she graduated with a degree in media arts and technology, and she would eventually move to Montreal in 2005. She was able to use her degree by working as a freelance editor for local stations and worked as a sales assistant. Her ultimate dream was to become a flight attendant, a job that would show her the world and everything it had to offer. However, this bright and happy young woman would soon become a frightened and paranoid one. In early 2008, she told her family she wanted to return to Quebec City as she was too frightened and didn't feel safe being in Montreal. February 10, 2010, Marilyn leaves her apartment in Hochelaga, Maisonneuve suddenly, and by the 16th of February, she's moved back home to Quebec City to be with her parents. It became clear to her family that something was deeply wrong. She appeared withdrawn and troubled. Her sister Natalie said that when questioned, Marilyn would refuse to talk and break down in tears. Marilyn denied it was financial woes, drug misuse, or relationship problems. Her mother persisted and asked if someone had assaulted her. When Marilyn went silent, she began to cry. Her mother begged her to seek the help of a psychologist and lift the emotional load that she had been carrying for so long. The day after settling back in with her family, on February 17, 2010, she told her parents she wanted to go for a walk. She wore her black coat and suede boots, took her credit card and left. At around 11 a.m., she was spotted on CCTV trying to withdraw $60 from an ATM in Loretteville, but her card was declined. The footage shows her repeatedly looking over her shoulder as if on the lookout for something or someone. That afternoon, she went to a coffee shop and paid using her card. The clerk said that she appeared agitated and eager to leave. When Marilyn didn't come home that night, her parents knew something was desperately wrong, and they reported her as a missing person to the police. Investigators traced her card to the ATM and coffee shop, and her parents scoured the city, handing out flyers in a desperate attempt to find their daughter. The story of her disappearance quickly became front-page news. Images of her circulated through different media circuits, and the investigation ramped up. When the police discovered the CCTV of the withdrawn and anxious Marilyn, parents, they were concerned it would cause them too much unnecessary distress. When her parents eventually watched the footage back, they agreed that she looked helpless. Famed crime reporter Claude Poirier examined the case as part of his TV show Poirier Enquête. When standing at the same ATM, he theorized that she could have been looking at a parked car on the street, which would have been in her line of vision. Further credence is added to this argument when considering that it was a 16-mile trip from her parents' house to the coffee shop. While it was feasible that she walked, as she was fit and healthy, her family argue it was more reasonable that she was driven by someone, but to date no one has come forward saying they gave her a lift. The trail quickly went cold and all leads were dead ends. It would be 2 years before any kind of breakthrough. A man got in contact with Claude Poirier, saying that Marilyn was in Hawkesbury, Ontario, and that he'd seen her there consistently in the area for over a year. Other locals confirmed this after seeing a photograph of her. They agreed that she had been living there with a man. Marilyn's family became frustrated with the lack of progress surrounding her disappearance. The police had not considered foul play and were treating it as a disappearance and possible suicide. Her family continued making requests to have the Sûreté de Québec, the SQ, or the Montreal police examine her case. The SQ can investigate across the province and had a formidable reputation, and the Montreal police can investigate in the city from which she fled. The requests of the family to have either force take over her case were rejected, and the family expressed their frustration at a press conference in February 2017. The Quebec City Police responded to the criticism and have done all they can to keep the family informed with the investigation. The SQ said through a spokesperson, in this case, wherever required, the Sûreté de Québec offered its full cooperation and support to the Quebec City Police Service. The reward to find their daughter was increased to $30,000 Canadian dollars. Their lawyer, former Justice Minister for the province, Marc Bellemare, expressed disappointment with investigators for refusing to hand over to either the SQ or the Montreal police. He also announced that a tip line had been set up in order to gather any possible leads on Marilyn's whereabouts. The family held another press conference in November that year, where they announced that 43 sightings had been reported to the tip line. Jonathan Gaultier, who had known Marilyn in college, had reconnected with her in 2007 while she was still in Montreal. He spoke with journalists on the 10th of December. He explained that she had become increasingly fearful and reclusive in the 2 months before her disappearance. He said that when he and Marilyn were going to the same party, he was shocked by the sudden change in Marilyn's personality. She was no longer the inquisitive and positive young woman she once was. Instead, she was despondent and listened to her music in the dark. When they got to the party, her mood slightly improved. But after talking with a friend, she quickly became frightened and anxious, as if she'd been reminded of something she wanted to forget. Asked to go home. When they returned to her apartment, her demeanor deteriorated rapidly and she began to cry uncontrollably. Jonathan tried to comfort her and to get her to explain what had happened. He asked if she had been raped or witnessed a murder. She said no, something much worse had happened. He continued to ask her what it was, but she would not say any more. She said to him, "You can't even begin to imagine what I've been through, Joe." He is quoted as saying, "I tried to get her to say what it was for 3 or 4 hours. I got the impression she did not want to put me in danger." The case of Marilyn Bergeron remains open. And since leaving the coffee shop on February the 17th, 2010, no trace of Marilyn has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Marilyn Bergeron, please contact the relevant authorities. When thinking about what makes somewhere a great place to live, we often consider the safety, the community, the friendliness of the locals, and there is one country that ticks all the boxes. Located off the east coast of Greenland, Iceland has been consistently voted one of the best countries in the world to live in. With a population of just over 340,000, one of the world's smallest, its breathtaking natural beauty packs a big punch. Natural springs and rolling hills attract tourists from all over the world. People travel from far and wide to experience the riches this small country has to offer. From the aurora borealis. Harsh winters mean sunlight can be scarce, but this merely adds to the intrigue of Iceland, a place so far removed from what most of us know and understand. One of the most appealing things about Iceland is the friendliness, openness, and kindness of its people. Due to the tough terrain and harsh winters, people rely on each other, value community, and take care of their neighbors. There are strong social attitudes against crime. They have no, and their police officers do not carry guns. People often leave their doors unlocked and get lifts with strangers. One Friday night in 2017, the peace and tranquility of Iceland would be shattered and a nation would be left reeling by a seemingly random, motiveless, and brutal murder. This is the story of Bernabe Ranksdottir. Bernabine Branslaughter lived in the southeast of Reykjavik. While her parents were no longer together, they remained on friendly terms and she was the center of their world. She was bright and spirited, with her fiery personality reflected in her striking, auburn hair. She was incredibly witty, with a sharp sense of humor, which made her popular amongst her friends. She was carefree and whimsical, but always responsible. With this maturity reflected in her relationship with her family and her mature attitude to work. Music was a big passion and Berner wasn't picky. She would listen to anything, from rap to pop and from rock to folk. It was this openness and free spirit that made so many people love her. Berner had a close-knit circle of friends and would enjoy the nightlife of Reykjavik. She worked in the fashion section of a busy department store and would unwind after work by going to the local bar for drinks before heading out to really let her hair down. And on the 13th of January, 2017, this is exactly what Berner did. That night, she closed up the shop and went for drinks and a few rounds of cards before heading into the center of the capital for a night of laughing, drinking, and dancing. They went to Hura, where the up-and-coming bands would play, and before long, Berner was dancing on the stage. Her friends were ready to leave by 2 a.m., but Berner wasn't. She wanted to carry on enjoying herself. Just before 5 a.m., she left the club and walked out into the -9 degrees weather. Before heading for a falafel and walking in the direction of her home. A woman walking alone in Reykjavik was not rare. People trusted each other and looked out for each other. Due to her intoxication, she dropped coins and stumbled into a stranger on the side of the road. As she carried on walking, she turned a corner and walked down a narrow lane towards the sea. Then she vanished. Her punctual reputation meant that when she failed to turn up for work, people were immediately concerned. One of her friends from school, Maria, who worked with Berner, was instantly unsettled by her absence. This was only made worse when she tried to call her mobile. It wouldn't connect, and Berner never turned off her phone. People suspected she had just gone back to her father's house to nurse her hangover. This is also what her friends thought who had been out with her that night, but she wasn't there. Berner's mother, Scylla, was called and she too was concerned over her daughter's whereabouts. She knew Berner and she knew this was out of character. Her family wasted no time. They went straight to the police and reported her missing. Realizing the power of social media, Scylla posted to her Facebook page, "It's not like her that we can't reach her. Please share and let's find her." Scylla. Iceland is a small community, and before long, Scylla's desperate pleas on Facebook were being shared, and news of Berner's disappearance began to circulate. The stress and worry of having a child go missing is unimaginable. Her parents couldn't sleep. They persistently made calls to all the emergency services, desperately seeking any new information on Berner's whereabouts. The following day, the police were her last known mobile interaction. Before it went dead, or was turned off just before 6 a.m., her phone pinged off a mobile tower in a port town, Hafnarfjordur, 6 miles outside of the capital. Scylla wasted no time and drove there, calling out to her daughter and searching the area. She was helped by a team of family and friends who were determined to bring Berner home. Before long, 36 hours had passed since Berner had disappeared into the Reykjavik night. Her family and friends were adamant that something terrible had happened to her. She was a reliable young woman and this was completely out of character. The police, however, had little to go on. They had no evidence of a murder or abduction, so there was not much they could do. As news of her disappearance carried on spreading, it quickly became headline news. Berner's face was plastered over newspapers and her name was in the mouth of every news anchor in Iceland. In the early hours of Sunday morning, her parents went to the police and begged them to search for her. They said she would not have gone off of her own accord, much less not told anyone where she was going. She had no money troubles or relationship problems. Everyone who knew Berner adored her. A case as baffling and unusual as this required Iceland's best detectives, one of which was Grimur Grimsson. He had 30 years of investigative experience. He was even part of a special team who spent more than 5 years building a case against those whose misconduct and corruption contributed to the financial crash of 2009. After this, he returned to his roots as a police officer, saying he missed the fast-paced work. Initially that concerned about Berner, there were many other factors that he had to consider. People do go missing in Iceland. Anything from mental health problems to simply staying at a friend's house and not telling people. Most missing people would eventually turn up. Capital cities throughout the world are laden with CCTV, but Reykjavik isn't like most capital cities. The Icelandic population have negative attitudes towards surveillance, and due to the low rates of crime, the population tends to police itself. They take care of each other and look out for strangers. But she was spotted on the night of her disappearance. CCTV showed her leaving the club, dropping her coins and walking into the stranger. When Grimsson checked the next camera less than a block away, she was gone. There were two options. Either she had gone down the side road off the corner, or got into a car. Grimsson had a keen eye for detail and was sure that there was a clue in that grainy CCTV that would eventually lead them to Berner. He noticed a car, a red Kia Rio, going on the opposite side of the road to Berner. He watched as it drove past the Lebowski bar, seconds after Berner had been seen there. This was a lead the officers had to pursue. Then came the next problem. They couldn't make out the license plate, who was driving or how many were in the car. Cars of that make and model in Iceland. This did nothing to calm the fears of her parents. Scylla was incandescent when they explained the quality of the tape was too poor to extract any more details from. Scylla said, "Can't you find it, like in the movies?" Grimsson replied, "It doesn't work like that." The police knew that while they didn't have enough in terms of CCTV, they did have a community with a spirit of hope. They appealed to the people of Iceland for their help. They held a rare press conference. Grimsson and Berner's distraught family went before the cameras and begged Iceland for its assistance in finding her. Scylla showed the media what kind of person her daughter was, explaining she was extremely intelligent, bilingual, with a love of other cultures, and a passion for exploring. The police hunched that the press conference would lead to a breakthrough proved right, and before long, they had their first lead. A pair of brothers decided to search Hafnarfjordur where her phone had pinged off of the tower, and when there, they headed towards the harbor. After searching in a fenced-off area, they found a pair of boots, black Doc Martens, identical to the pair that Burner had last been seen wearing. Using the power of social media, they posted a picture of them to Facebook, and before long the officers arrived. They confirmed the shoes were Burner's. Finally, the police felt like they were getting somewhere. Grimson demanded officers scour through the CCTV with a fine-tooth comb, and soon they saw a familiar picture. At 6 a.m. on the morning Burner vanished. A red Kia Rio pulled into the harbor. A man climbed out of the car and staggered off in a drunken state towards a fishing trawler that had docked there. The car then drove off. Finally, they could make out a number plate. The car had been rented by a 25-year-old fisherman from Greenland, Thomas Mahler Olsen. The car had since been rented by a family who complained of a stench of chemicals coming from the back. After impounding the car, officers were determined to find any trace of Burner, and soon they had a clue. Blood spots in the back seat. Samples were quickly gathered and sent off to Sweden for analysis, in a desperate bid to see if it matched Burner. For Grimson and his team, it was now a race against time. They needed to find the trawler, and their only suspects, Thomas Mahler Olsen and Nikolaj Olsen. Thomas and Nikolaj weren't related, but were crewmates on the trawler. Thomas was considered easygoing, approachable, and generally likable. Whilst on board, his phone pinged. Thomas went pale. It was a news article saying that the ship he was on was linked to the disappearance of Burner. A journalist had contacted a Facebook group used by the men on board and asked who had rented the car and who was seen on the CCTV. Thomas was visibly shaken. His captain assured him that if he was innocent he would be fine. The challenge for Grimson and his team was huge. The longer his suspects were on the anything incriminating. He needn't have worried, because the ship's captain had already formed a plan. He had read of the link between the ship and Burner, so turned it around and headed back towards Iceland. He and his high-ranking officers agreed they would say engine problems had forced the turnaround, and the Wi-Fi was disabled so that the suspects could not read anything about the case. The police were keen to use the element of surprise and so used members of their elite squad to board the ship as soon as it came back into Icelandic territory. Officers were dropped onto the ship from a helicopter, and finally the police had their two suspects in custody. The reaction of the public to the case was massive, and the whole country was waiting on tenterhooks for any news of what had happened to Burner. The case seemed to take over all aspects of Icelandic life. Although their intentions were good, online sleuths only added to from fact. Stories ranged from a body being found in a lake, to Burner and other women being found alive on the trawler, swirled around social media. Grimson remained calm and called for the same. However well-intentioned people were, it wasn't helping in the search for Burner. At around 11 p.m. on Wednesday night, the ship came back into port and the two suspects were brought back onto Icelandic soil in handcuffs. Then came the news that nobody wanted to hear. The blood in the rental car was Burner's. The police wasted no time in questioning the two men. Nikolaj and Thomas were sure that they had done nothing to Burner and gave similar accounts of the events of that fateful night. They had both separated and gone to different drinking spots before meeting up again as the night began to wind down. Nikolaj was already incredibly drunk and his account was hazy. Although Nikolaj could remember nothing about them, they said they had picked up two girls on the high street, one of which was Burner. Thomas said he dropped Nikolaj off at the ship before driving away. He then climbed into the back with the two girls where they kissed before he dropped them off an hour later. The police were inclined to believe Nikolaj. He had been seen walking away and was clearly in no fit state to do anything. However, when it came to Thomas, they had a bad feeling, and the evidence against him was stacking up. He was examined by a doctor who determined the wounds on his chest were signs of a struggle or fight. When searching the ship, the police found a driver's license in the bin. It belonged to Burner. They also found drugs with a street value of nearly £1.5 million. He claimed to have slept in the car, but the police checked the odometer, which showed that the car had been taken for a long drive. CCTV would prove to be their friend also, as he was seen in a shop, buying plastic bags and cleaning fluid, before scrubbing the inside of the car. Police didn't believe his excuse that he had been sick and was simply trying to clean it. were burners, and when they used luminol to highlight any blood not seen with a naked eye, the back of the car lit up. It was absolutely covered in blood. 4 days after she vanished, Iceland launched the biggest search in its history. The search and rescue project manager said today, "She is our sister, our daughter," that became the mantra. We don't live in a society where we tolerate a 20-year-old woman being abducted in the night. It wouldn't be long before the police found what they were looking for. A Coast Guard helicopter noticed something floating in the water near a local lighthouse. It was a body. They had found Berner. And with this announcement, Iceland plunged into mourning. The shock and disbelief was palpable. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies and other countries. It didn't happen in Iceland. Citizens of Greenland were also appalled and grieved alongside their Nordic neighbor. The high street in Reykjavik from which Berner had disappeared became a shrine, lit up by candles. Berner's funeral was held at the biggest church in the country, the Hallgrímskirkja, and over 2,000 people attended. Prime Minister, the public wanted answers and the police needed to provide them. First, they had to ascertain the cause of death. Berner had been found naked, but they could find no evidence of a sexual assault. The examiner found that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and had been strangled as well. However, the official cause of death was ruled as drowning. She had survived the initial attack and was alive when she was put into the water. Grimson and his team examined the evidence in front of them. They could find no link between Berner's murder and Nicolaj, and they did not believe he was involved. After 2 weeks in custody and hours of interrogation, he was freed. Their attention now turned back to Thomas. His story remained the same and he wasn't changing it. Over the course of 9 interviews with police, he maintained his innocence. While the police had their crime scene and suspect, they could find no reason or motive as to why Thomas would murder Berner, but the evidence continued to mount. They'd been able to find his DNA, Berner's Doc Martens, and his fingerprints were found on her discarded driving license. On the 30th of March, 2017, breaking news alerts were spreading all over Iceland. The police had charged Thomas Mahler Olsen with drug possession and murder. Media interest in the story reached a fever pitch as his trial began in August of that year. It was during his trial that he sensationally changed his story. He said that there were not 2 girls, only one, Berner. He said that he had left the car to go to the bathroom and Nicolaj had driven off with Berner in the back seat, and when he returned she wasn't with him. The court was stunned. He was now trying to pin the murder on his crewmate. With a low voice and a face covered, he admitted to the drug possession but denied murder. In September, the 3 judges had reached their verdict. Guilty on all counts, and he was led away to begin his 19-year prison sentence. Thomas Mahler Olsen has appealed his conviction, but the High Court upheld it, and the following year the High Court refused to consider another appeal. The murder of Bernad Brandstoter was a crime that shook Iceland. The chaplain who presided over Bernad's funeral said, "This case will be remembered. It changed us a bit. Our feeling of security." CCTV around Reykjavik was increased, and women became more wary of strangers. For Grimmel Grimson, despite 30 years of service, this had been his first murder case. His calm and coordinated approach made him a hero in Iceland. He now proudly represents his country in the European Union's Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation, based in The Hague. Despite the tragic events surrounding the murder of Bernadette Brandstoter, her memory continues to be kept alive, and the people of Iceland are determined that she will never be forgotten. Born on November 9, 1961, in Weston-super-Mare, Somerset, she resembled Lady Diana of Wales, which seemed to endear her even more to the British public. Jill was raised by her parents, Winifred Mary John Hockey and Jack Dando, in the Baptist faith, along with her brother, Nigel, who was 9 years her senior. Jill and Nigel shared a good relationship and had common professional interests as they grew. At 3 years old, Jill underwent successful surgery for a cardiac problem and a blockage in a pulmonary artery, discovered in January 1965. Educated at well-known schools like Worrell Infant School, Greenwood Junior School, and Worrell Comprehensive School, Jill followed in her father's and brother's footsteps, studying journalism in Cardiff. She interned at the local news weekly, Weston Mercury, where her brother and father also worked. After succeeding in her region, she began broadcasting news for BBC Radio Devon and was soon transferred to present regional television programs. Her dedication and professionalism propelled her to the national channel, where she narrated primetime newscasts and hosted a lot for renowned programs. Jill's popularity soared, and in 1997, she was named BBC's Personality of the Year. Dando presented the BBC television programs Breakfast Time, Breakfast News, the BBC 1 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, the travel program Holiday, the crime appeal series, Crime Watch, and occasionally Songs of Praise. In 1994, she moved to Fulham. On April 25, 1999, Dando presented the first episode of Antiques Inspectors. She was scheduled to present the 6 o'clock news on the evening of the following day. She was featured on the cover of that week's Radio Times magazine. Dando was also booked to host the British Academy Television Awards 1999 alongside Michael Parkinson at Grosvenor House Hotel on May 9. At the time of her murder, she had just commenced the new season of the successful crime program, Crime Watch, with co-host Nick Ross. Their partnership had lasted from 1995 until the Sunday before her death. Jill's murder left her plans with fiancé Alan Farthing, a gynecologist and obstetrician. She met in December 1997, unfulfilled. They had planned to marry on September 25, 1999, but Jill's life was cut short. In the week leading to her death, Jill was busy with various activities, including traveling to Dublin to record her show. On April 26, the fateful Monday, Jill's movements were meticulously recorded. She and Alan awoke at 6:45. After he left for the hospital, Jill attended several phone calls before leaving her house at 10:05 a.m. in her blue convertible. After stopping for petrol at 10:20 a.m., she headed to Hammersmith Shopping Centre. From there, she drove home to Fulham and parked near her front door. As she was looking for her keys, she was attacked from behind, held face down, and shot. The bullet entered above her left ear and exited through the right side of her skull, killing her instantly. Her body was discovered minutes later by a neighbor who was passing by and saw her lying in a pool of blood. She was transported to Charing Cross Hospital, where she was declared dead at the time. Jill's funeral took place on May 21, 1999. She was buried next to her mother, who died years before in 1986 at the age of 57 due to leukemia. Since then, countless leads have been followed to find the murderer and mastermind. As in her journalism career, Jill touched on subjects that affected powerful interests. And one of these subjects could have been the motive for the crime. The crime investigation is remembered as one of the largest and most intense of recent decades in England. The Metropolitan Police titled the investigation Operation Oxborough, led by Detective Hamish Campbell, who had 45 people on his team. They interviewed about 5,000 people, took approximately 2,500 witness statements, answered around 80,000 phone calls, analyzed more than 2,000 potential suspects, and examined 14,000 emails. Furthermore, they reviewed 195 surveillance cameras, which showed that Jill was not followed by anyone that morning. Despite intense investigation, no lead led to the capture of the murderer due to the absolute absence of clues. The motive for robbery was immediately dismissed as Jill wore an expensive watch and a valuable engagement ring and was not robbed of them. Abuse was also quickly ruled out. Forensic studies revealed that the projectile that killed Jill came from a 9mm semi-automatic weapon, whose barrel was rested against her head at the time of firing. The weapon remained a great mystery and was never found. According to experts, the bullet had strange markings, seemed to come from a modified or homemade weapon, and was 2mm shorter than the standard 9mm. Richard Hughes, a neighbor of Jill, reported that he heard her give a small scream and looked out the window. He only saw a white man about 1.8 meters tall, around 40 years old, with abundant dark, straight hair, and a double chin leaving Jill's house entrance. He wore an elegant, closed brown coat. There were other casual witnesses who saw a man talking on the phone from various points close to Jill's house. Everyone described the subject in the same way Richard did, and emphasized that he was elegantly dressed. During the first months, the investigation focused on the 20 people closest to Jill, like her boyfriend, her 6 partners, her brother, her agent, and her co-workers. After examining them, certifying alibis, and making phone inquiries, they were ruled out as suspects. The economic motive was also ruled out. The £600,000 left by Jill went to her father. who was over 80 years old. The second circle that was investigated included about 490 people who knew her and had more circumstantial relationships. A scorned fan was also considered. And Nigel, her older brother, reported that she was worried about a guy who bothered her in the days before her death. However, that lead didn't lead to anything. Time passed until in 2000, investigators focused their attention on Barry George, a 39-year, who lived about half a mile from Dando's house. This man lived about 500 meters from Jill and had a history of arrests for attacks on women, abuse, and served 33 months in prison. George wanted to be a policeman but failed the admission. He was caught using fake police credentials, for which he was taken to court. Moreover, he was once found hidden in the gardens of Kensington Palace, where Prince Charles of England and Diana Spencer lived. He had a knife and a poem he wrote to Charles in his pocket. George was arrested on May 25, 2000, and charged with Jill's murder. But the only evidence was when they searched his house and found a residue of ammunition compatible with that used in a crime in the pocket of his coat. Although witnesses could not identify him as the man they saw at the scene, it was proven that he was in the area about 4 hours before the crime. Before the trial for Jill's death, George was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, epilepsy, attention deficit, psychopathy, and paranoia. He also had a very low IQ of 75. In 1989, he married a Japanese student who reported him for violence 4 months later, and they separated in 1990. He worked as a messenger at the BBC television centre for 6 months. When arrested, 4 copies of the newspaper reporting Jill's death were found with him. He was tried at Old Bailey and sentenced to life imprisonment on July 2, 2001. Some thought that the evidence against George was weak and that the pressure to solve the crime of someone so famous was decisive. After 3 appeals, he was retried on December 14, 2007 and was acquitted on August 1, 2008. After spending 8 years in prison, the Supreme Court found that the evidence was so inconclusive that a sentence could not be based on it. In 2012, after the death of the famous British TV eccentric Jimmy Savile and after learning of his abuses to children, it was recalled that in the mid-90s, Jill obtained information about a group of pedophiles who were recognized figures. In 2014, it was revealed by a former co-worker that Jill had sought to bring certain testimonies to the attention of her superiors, but her bosses reportedly found no substantial evidence to prompt further investigation on the matter. There were also circulating speculations that a mobster, previously exposed on the program, Crime Watch, may have contracted a professional assassin for revenge. However, this theory was largely dismissed, as the weapon appeared to be of such poor quality that it would be unlikely to be used by a seasoned criminal. Jill's dedication and work enabled the BBC to collect a total of £6.5 million for the victims of the Kosovo War. The day after the tragic passing of the talented presenter, information surfaced that Tony Hall, the chief of BBC News, received a phone call containing death threats from a man with an Eastern European accent. There were statements suggesting that Jill's assassination might have been a commissioned crime by a Serbian leader in retaliation for the bombs dropped by NATO on the headquarters of Serbian radio and television on April 23, 1999. Michael Mansfield, George Barry's defense barrister, suggested that Dando's earlier presentation of an appeal for aid for Kosovo Albanian refugees may have attracted the attention of Bosnian Serb hardliners. Dando's appeal for aid for the Kosovo Alban refugees had been shown on television 3 weeks before her murder. In 2019, it was reported that the British National Criminal Intelligence Service had given an intelligence report to the Dando murder inquiry, claiming that the murder was in retaliation for the RTS bombing, and Arkin had ordered the killing. The report highlighted a possible connection between the bullet used to kill Dando and bullets used in assassinations in Germany, namely, handmade markings found on them. An opposition journalist, Slavko Karavidja, was assassinated outside his home in Belgrade just a few days before Dando's murder, and the method used in both cases was identical. In 2019, 4 men of the Serbian Secret Service were convicted of this murder. In 2002, journalist Bob Waffenden had advanced the view that a Yugoslav group was behind the Dando killing and, in various newspaper articles, contested all the grounds on which the police had dismissed this possibility. Jack, Jill's father, passed away in 2009 without witnessing the resolution of his daughter's crime. In April 2019, commemorating the 20th anniversary of Jill's murder, BBC aired a documentary on the crime that captivated 4 million viewers. More than 2 decades have transpired since the murder of the journalist and television presenter, Jill Dando, who was shot dead in April 1999 by an unknown gunman. The events unfolded in London, England, and despite the shock and outrage the crime ignited, the culprit remains uncaptured. The mastermind behind the assassination could possibly be a highly influential political figure, a member of a pedophile ring, or could even have links to an international mafia aiming to silence journalists. The case filed is still active. Her brother, Nigel, remains steadfast in his resolve to uncover the truth, expressing his hope to learn who and why his sister was murdered before his own passing, believing it wasn't a commissioned crime but a solitary act of brutality. Well, that concludes today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video, it will help me continue to create content. See you in another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.